A retired California teacher vanished from his home. 3 years later, police discover his car rusted and abandoned. What really happened? You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who seek the truth behind unexplained vanishings will do it before this story begins. The cold bite of the autumn evening had settled deep into Ravenwood, weaving through the narrow streets and creeping up the old elm trees that lined the sidewalks. The town, usually quiet at this hour, seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere down Elm Street, the faint glow of a porch light flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness. Detective Daniel Price stood outside the modest home, a clipboard clutched in his hand, brow furrowed as he surveyed the scene. The front yard was neat but unremarkable. A well-tended garden bed, a few fallen leaves scattered like forgotten memories. Yet, something unsettled him. The stillness felt too heavy, too expectant. His sharp eyes caught the broken latch on the back window, a subtle sign that someone might have forced their way in. A scuff mark near the porch, faint but telling, spoke of a struggle or hurried movement. Inside, the soft yellow glow from the kitchen window illuminated a journal left open on the worn wooden table. Daniel's fingers itched to read the pages, but he fought the impulse. He had to follow procedure. His voice came low, careful. "Martin Jenkins?" The man who answered was tall, with tired eyes that reflected a mix of hope and fear. "Yes, I'm Harold's son. I came as soon as I could." Martin's voice cracked slightly, betraying his exhaustion. "He never came back from his walk last night. No calls, no messages. Nothing." Daniel nodded. "Has your father ever mentioned feeling unsafe? Anyone troubling him?" Martin hesitated, then said quietly, "He said he felt watched, uneasy like someone was following him. But he didn't say much more. I thought it was just retirement loneliness catching up." He looked away, jaw tight. "I wish I had taken it more seriously." The detective's gaze softened for a moment, then hardened again. "We'll find him, I promise." As Daniel stepped inside, the house greeted him with a faint scent of lavender and old books. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by his movement. His eyes scanned the walls, framed photographs of a younger Harold with students, awards for teaching, happy moments frozen in time. But those images contrasted sharply with the journal on the kitchen table. The last visible entry read, "The shadow is closer. I hear footsteps when no one's there. The silence weighs heavy." The words unsettled Daniel, echoing an unease he could not shake. He pulled out his phone and dialed Martin's number. "Tell me more about these feelings your father had," Daniel urged, voice steady but insistent. On the other end, Martin sighed. "He never wanted to worry me, but the past few weeks he mentioned strange noises at night. Footsteps in the hallway, doors creaking open. He said he felt like he was being watched, but no one was ever there when he checked." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought it was just his imagination." Daniel's mind raced. Had Harold stumbled upon something dangerous? Or was this a symptom of fear rooted in loneliness? The questions twisted in his gut like cold steel. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old window panes. The quiet street seemed to press inward, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Daniel knew the first 48 hours in a missing person case were critical, but with no sign of struggle, no witness, no ransom note, the mystery tightened like a noose. He pulled out a map from his jacket pocket, spreading it over the kitchen counter. Fingers tracing the faded lines, he marked the usual walking paths Harold took, the familiar trails winding through the nearby woods and fields. Then he stopped, marking the last ping of Harold's phone. A small clearing near the Miller farm on the outskirts of town. The image stuck in his mind, a solitary place, quiet, overlooked, perfect for a secret or a trap. Daniel looked out the window into the darkening night, the street lamp casting long shadows. He took a deep breath, the chill settling into his bones, and whispered, "Something's not right here." Daniel's boots pressed steadily into the damp earth of the Miller farm clearing, the mist clinging to his jacket like a silent warning. The morning air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves and cold metal, rusted farming equipment scattered like forgotten relics beneath a sky so gray it seemed to swallow sound itself. His breath came out in quiet puffs as he scanned the underbrush, eyes narrowing on a torn piece of fabric snagged in the jagged thorns of a bush. The fibers, dark and frayed, contrasted sharply with the muted browns and greens surrounding them. He crouched, gently lifting the cloth, careful not to disturb its fragile placement. A soft crunch echoed behind him, fallen leaves crushed underfoot, yet the forest remained eerily still. Daniel's gaze flicked to a set of footprints muddied by last night's rain. They led cautiously toward the creek, a narrow ribbon of water that gurgled faintly through the dense trees. Nearby, a few broken twigs suggested a hurried passage, but no sign of Harold himself. His chest tightened with urgency, each clue a whisper in the growing storm of worry. He pulled out his notebook, jotting down every detail. The silence around him was oppressive, the kind that pressed on the skin and burrowed into the bones. Daniel's mind raced. The fabric could be from Harold's jacket, but was it from a struggle? The footprints too small to be many, but they vanished into the undergrowth like a ghost's trail. The weight of the unknown settled heavily, and a shiver ran down his spine, not from cold but from a creeping dread. Returning to the police station, the stale scent of burnt coffee and fluorescent light greeted him. Miguel Alvarez looked up from a stack of files, his weathered face thoughtful. "Find anything?" Miguel asked, voice low but steady. Daniel spread his notes across the table. A torn piece of fabric, footprints leading to the creek, broken twigs, nothing concrete yet, but signs someone was here. Maybe Harold. His fingers tapped impatiently. But what worries me more are the feelings Harold had. Watched. Uneasy. I don't buy it, but what if there's something more? Miguel folded his arms, skepticism etched in his furrowed brow. Feeling watched or not, we need to look into his past. Someone could have had a reason to make him nervous. Enemies. Maybe. Old grudges. Daniel nodded slowly, appreciating Miguel's pragmatism. I'll start digging. See if anything pops up. Threats, disputes, anyone who'd want him gone. The evening thickened with shadows when Martin Jenkins arrived. His shoulders slumped beneath the weight of sleepless nights and frantic worry. His eyes, rimmed with fatigue, met Daniel's with a silent plea. "My father." "He wasn't himself," Martin said softly, voice rough with exhaustion. "He mentioned visiting a man, Clarence Reed. Lives on the outskirts. People say he knows things best left alone." Daniel exchanged a glance with Miguel, tension tightening the room. "Then we find Clarence," Daniel said, determination hardening his tone. "Maybe he knows more than anyone else." The following day's light was pale and diffused as Daniel and Miguel threaded through a tangled forest path toward Clarence's home. The shack emerged from the woods like a shadow, its weathered wood warped by time, vines crawling up its sides as if nature itself tried to swallow the place whole. The air here felt colder, heavier, weighted with secrets. Clarence Reed awaited them on the porch, his sharp eyes scanning the approaching men with a mixture of suspicion and wary calculation. His handshake was firm but brief, lips pressed into a thin line. "You're looking for Harold Jenkins," he said, voice low and gravelly. Daniel stepped forward, voice steady. "We need to know what he told you." Clarence's gaze flickered, then settled on the forest beyond. "He came to me terrified, said he uncovered something dangerous, a secret from Ravenwood's past that some would kill to keep hidden." His words hung like smoke, curling around the men's resolve. Miguel shifted uneasily, his hand resting near his holster. "What kind of secret?" Clarence's eyes darkened. "Corruption. Deals made in shadows decades ago. Powerful men with too much to lose." Daniel's jaw clenched. The feeling of danger pressed in like a tightening noose. Yet surrender was impossible. "We're not turning back." As they turned to leave, Clarence's voice dropped to a warning. "Be careful. You just stepped into a hornet's nest." Miguel's whisper was grim, barely audible over the rustling leaves. "We just stepped into a hornet's nest." Daniel nodded but clenched his jaw. "We have no choice but to see this through." Daniel stared at the thin stack of yellowed papers spread across his cluttered desk, the dim light of the desk lamp casting long shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls of the small precinct office. Each document detailed transactions from nearly 50 years ago, signatures blurred, dates faded, yet the significance was clear. Mayor Robert Lang and a handful of prominent businessmen had orchestrated a land deal that had quietly reshaped Ravenwood, quietly enriched a select few, and pushed out many longtime residents. The more Daniel read, the heavier the weight settled on his chest. This could be it, Daniel muttered, voice low and tense, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced the names over and over. He glanced at Miguel, who sat opposite him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Miguel's usually calm demeanor was replaced with a guarded intensity. Those families? They're still here, still powerful, Miguel said, voice steady but grim. If Harold stumbled onto this, someone wanted him silenced before he could speak. Daniel swallowed hard, the knot of worry tightening in his stomach. But the trail's cold. No recent activity at the mayor's office. No signs these men have stirred in decades. It's like the past swallowed the present. Miguel leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. People get good at hiding when their skins are on the line. We've got to dig deeper. Later that afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Martin Jenkins. The younger man's voice over the call was raw, edged with frustration and a flicker of hope. I spoke to some of Dad's old students and a few friends, Martin said, pacing nervously in his cramped motel room. Turns out, he'd been meeting with a librarian, Mr. Thompson. Real quiet guy, keeps to himself, but he's been helping Dad go through the town's archives. Daniel frowned, the pieces clicking into place. The library might hold more than just old books. Martin's breath hitched. Yeah, I went there today. He was reluctant, but eventually, he showed me this hidden room beneath the main floor, stacks of files, photos, records, and a folder labeled Project Ravenwood. It outlines illegal land acquisitions and threats against Dad. It's serious, Daniel. The silence that followed was heavy. That night, Daniel found himself standing outside the library. The building was nearly deserted, its windows glowing faintly with soft yellow light. He took a deep breath, the crisp night air sharp against his skin, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the scent of aging paper and dust filled his nostrils. Mr. Thompson awaited him near the stairwell leading to the basement. His eyes were tired, shadowed with worry, but there was a flicker of determination as he handed Daniel a manila envelope. Be careful with what you find, Thompson warned, voice low and hoarse. There are people in this town who won't hesitate to bury the truth permanently. Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. Back at the station, the unease only deepened. His phone vibrated again. An anonymous note appeared on his desk the next morning, typed words stark and cold. Stop digging or suffer the consequences. The night that followed was a nightmare. Shards of glass littered his porch. A dead animal lay grotesquely at the doorstep. The message was terrifyingly clear. Eyes were watching, and the threat was real. Daniel's hands clenched into fists as he recounted the events to Miguel, the fire in his eyes refusing to dim despite the danger. They think they can scare me off, but Harold's out there somewhere, counting on us. Miguel's voice was low, cautious, yet firm. This isn't just some old scandal anymore. It's a living, breathing threat. We've crossed a line. Daniel met his partner's gaze, the weight of responsibility pressing on him like never before. We owe Harold that much. He deserves to be found. Daniel's eyes locked on the grainy frame flickering across the monitor. A shadowy figure slipping into the sliding door of a dark, unmarked van parked near the edge of the Miller farm. The timestamp was the night Harold vanished. The image was blurred, the details obscured by poor lighting and a shaky camera angle, but the figure was unmistakably Harold Jenkins. His posture was tense, shoulders hunched as if bracing against an invisible threat. Daniel leaned forward, squinting, his heart pounding as the reality sank in. There's no mistaking it. That's Harold, he whispered, voice rough with disbelief. Miguel stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw clenched tightly. The atmosphere in the room thickened with urgency and dread. "This van," Daniel continued, "no registration, no plates. It's like it disappeared right after." His fingers tapped rapidly on the keyboard, pulling up lists of local vehicles, cross-referencing every unregistered van, every suspicious vehicle reported. "If it's not registered here, it's either stolen or brought in from outside. We're dealing with professionals." Miguel's eyes darkened with frustration. Who has the resources to pull this off? And why here in our town? He rubbed the back of his neck. Someone doesn't want this coming to light. For days, Daniel and Miguel chased phantom leads, interviewing mechanics at garages, questioning night shift attendants at truck stops, and reviewing security tapes from nearby businesses. Each inquiry ended with a dead end, a whispered denial, or a shadow of fear. The van remained elusive, as if it had evaporated into the night. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town, Martin sat across from Clarence Reed. The older man's eyes darted nervously between the peeling wallpaper and the worn wooden table as he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "Sentinel Group," Clarence said, fingers twitching as if reliving past terrors, "has been here longer than most know. They protect the town's powerful, yes. But their protection isn't what you think." Martin's gaze hardened, sensing the weight behind Clarence's words. "You mean they're involved in something darker?" Clarence leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Intimidation. Silencing voices. Anyone who threatens the status quo gets dealt with quietly. Harold wasn't just lucky to stumble onto a secret. He stepped into a hornet's nest." Martin swallowed hard, the chill of realization creeping through him. "That's why he disappeared. They're trying to bury him." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears, before Martin straightened his back. "I won't let them win. I'll find him. I'll find the truth." Back at the station, as rain pattered against the window pane, Daniel's phone buzzed with an encrypted email. With a flicker of hesitation, he opened the message and found a video attachment. The screen crackled to life, revealing shaky footage of a dimly lit room. There, Harold sat, gaunt but alive, eyes tired yet burning with resolve. His voice was faint but clear. "They can't hide the truth forever. Find the files in the library. Trust no one." Daniel's breath caught. The man they were searching for was still fighting, still hoping. A surge of determination flooded through Daniel's veins. He turned to Miguel, his expression fierce. "We're running out of time, and Harold is counting on us." Daniel and Miguel stood motionless in the dim light of the library's hidden room, their eyes scanning every shelf, every folder, every box stuffed with yellowed papers and brittle photographs. The air was thick with dust and the faint, musty scent of forgotten history. Outside, the world moved on unaware, but inside these walls, the weight of decades of secrets pressed down on them. Hours passed in tense silence as they sifted through documents, their fingers trembling slightly from the adrenaline pulsing through their veins. Then Daniel's eyes caught it. A thin binder, its spine cracked and worn, labeled in faded ink, "Sentinel Group, Contracts and Payments." He lifted it carefully, feeling the brittle papers between his fingers. Opening the binder, the harsh glare of the overhead lamp illuminated rows of typed contracts, hand-signed agreements, and financial ledgers filled with irregular payments. Each page was a thread weaving together the private security firm's insidious connection to Ravenwood's most powerful men. Names of town officials appeared repeatedly, alongside figures suggesting bribes and hush money. Miguel leaned over Daniel's shoulder, his usually steady voice now low and tight. "This is it. This is what Harold found." Daniel swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. "They've been paying Sentinel to keep the truth buried, and probably to keep Harold quiet." A sudden creak echoed from the floor above. Both men froze, hearts pounding, eyes darting toward the narrow staircase leading upward. Miguel raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. Daniel felt every nerve alert, every sense sharpened. The faintest shuffle of footsteps made their blood run cold. They moved cautiously, crouching low as they ascended the staircase, each step creaking underfoot. At the top, the hallway stretched out in shadows. A flicker of movement caught Daniel's eye. A dark shape collapsed near the stairwell. "Mr. Thompson." Daniel's voice was urgent but hushed. He rushed forward, his hands trembling as he knelt beside the fallen man. Bruises bloomed across Thompson's pale face, his breathing shallow and uneven. A long, angry gash marked his temple, blood dried and crusted. Miguel pulled out his phone, dialing emergency services with quick, precise movements. Daniel pressed a hand to Thompson's forehead, his heart aching. "Who did this? Who attacked you?" But the librarian's lips twitched weakly. No words came. The answer hung heavy in the stale air. Their mission suddenly crystal clear. Someone was willing to use violence to protect these secrets, to silence anyone who dared to uncover the truth. Daniel's mind raced, fear mingling with fury. He gathered the binder and the other key documents into a worn leather satchel. "We have to get these safe," he said, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Outside the library, the night was deep and still, a thick fog curling through the streets like a living thing. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Daniel's instincts flared. His gaze snapped to a black SUV parked across the street. The vehicle's windows were tinted, engine humming softly like a predator waiting to strike. "Move," Daniel urged, quickening his pace. Miguel followed closely, eyes scanning every shadow. The SUV's headlights flicked on suddenly, slicing through the mist. The engine roared, tires squealed on the wet pavement as the vehicle surged forward, chasing them. Daniel's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands and read the message. "You're closer than you think. Stop now or face the consequences." His chest tightened. The words were a threat and a warning. Miguel's jaw clenched beside him, fists balled tight. "They want us scared," Miguel growled, voice low but fierce. "We can't give them that satisfaction." Daniel met his partner's eyes, the fire of resolve blazing in both their gazes. The danger was real, the stakes higher than ever, but backing down was not an option. "Harold's fate depends on us." Daniel sat behind his cluttered desk, the dim light of the overhead lamp casting long shadows across the walls of the police station's evidence room. The air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and paper, reminders of long nights spent chasing leads. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the series of documents spread before him, tracing the intricate web that connected the Sentinel Group to the town's highest officials. His fingers trembled slightly as he pieced together forged signatures and clandestine payments, each note revealing the dark heart of a development project threatening to uproot families who had called Ravenwood home for generations. Miguel stood nearby, arms crossed, his usually steady demeanor tinged with a trace of frustration. "This isn't just about money anymore," he muttered, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "They're trying to silence anyone who stands in their way, and Harold stumbled into something they won't forgive." Daniel nodded, jaw tight. "It's why the pressure's so intense. Harold wasn't just nosing around, he was holding proof. If that goes public, everything they've built falls apart." The two men exchanged a knowing look, understanding the dangerous path ahead. Then the door creaked open, and Martin slipped in quietly, exhaustion etched into his youthful face. His eyes burned with urgency as he stepped forward. "I met someone who might help," Martin said, voice low but determined. "Jason Lee. He used to work for Sentinel but left after things got ugly." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And he trusts you?" Martin swallowed hard. "Not yet, but I promised him protection. He's scared, but he knows what they're capable of." The trio gathered around a small table near the window, the night sky beyond dark and still. When Jason Lee arrived, his posture was tense, his eyes darting nervously as he took his seat. "You don't know what you're up against," Jason warned, voice rough with years of suppressed fear. "Sentinel isn't just security guards with badges. They intimidate, kidnap, and blackmail anyone who threatens their control." Daniel leaned in, steady but alert. "We're here to find Harold. Do you know where they're holding him?" Jason's gaze dropped. "There's a place. The Hollow. Deep in the forest, a compound where they break people. It's where they keep prisoners until they give up. Martin's fists clenched. We have to get him out. Jason's jaw tightened. It won't be easy. They're well armed, and the place is almost impossible to find without a guide. Daniel's mind raced, weighing the risks against the urgency. We don't have a choice. The longer he's there, the worse it gets. The men sat in heavy silence, the weight of their mission settling over them. Plans began to form, fragile but necessary. Then, as the hours deepened into the early morning, Daniel prepared to leave. On the floor beside his door, a thin envelope had appeared, stark against the cold tiles. His heart thumped as he knelt and slipped the envelope open, pulling out a folded map marked with a jagged red circle deep in the nearby forest, the hollow. Below it, scrawled in black ink, was a chilling warning. This is your last chance to turn back. Daniel's breath caught. His hand trembled as he folded the map slowly. The station felt colder now, shadows pressing in as doubt crept like a poison. No turning back now, he whispered. The sun had barely risen when Daniel tightened the straps on his backpack, his fingers trembling slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Miguel checked the loaded handgun at his side with practiced ease, though a flicker of unease crossed his normally stoic face. Martin adjusted the worn map Jason had handed them the night before, folding and refolding it. His jaw clenched tight in silent determination. Jason, quiet but alert, inspected the small knife strapped to his belt, his gaze flickering toward the dense forest that loomed before them. They slipped into the forest's edge, where sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, and shadows twisted like living things. Every footfall was muffled by the thick undergrowth, every branch snapping underfoot a warning bell in their tense minds. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, a scent that seemed to press against their lungs with each breath. A cool mist hovered low, clinging to their skin and sharpening their senses. Ahead, the narrow trail snaked through gnarled roots and moss-covered stones, a hidden path long forgotten except by those who had dark secrets to guard. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the surroundings, ears straining for any sign of movement beyond the rustling leaves. "Keep close," he whispered, voice low but steady. Miguel nodded, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. The tension tightened with every step. Suddenly, the faint murmur of distant voices carried on the wind. Two men speaking in low tones near the compound's perimeter. They halted behind a massive oak, pressed close to the rough bark. The fence was visible now, tall, topped with gleaming barbed wire that caught the faint light like cruel silver teeth. Mounted cameras rotated methodically, their lenses glinting ominously. Jason pointed silently to a small gate guarded by two armed sentries. Their dark uniforms blended with the shadows, faces unreadable but threatening. The group exchanged grim looks. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the cold air sharpen his focus. "Jason, you're up. Cut the power to the generator on my mark." His voice was barely audible, but his eyes held an unshakable resolve. Jason nodded, pulling a thin wire cutter from his pack. He melted into the shadows, moving with practiced stealth. Seconds stretched like hours. Then snap! The forest plunged into unnatural silence as the generator hummed to a halt, and the floodlights bathing the perimeter flickered and died. The night swallowed the compound in darkness. "Now," Daniel hissed. Miguel and Martin melted into the shadows, their movements fluid and deliberate as they skirted the gate. Daniel followed close behind, muscles coiled like springs, every nerve alert. The deafening silence was punctuated only by their quiet breaths and the occasional rustle of leaves. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The compound smelled of cold metal and damp concrete, a sterile scent that sent chills down Daniel's spine. Faint cries echoed from down a narrow corridor, sharp and urgent, pulling at something deep within him. They moved cautiously, eyes adjusting to the dim emergency lights that cast long, eerie shadows against the walls. At last, they found the small, barred room. The door was locked tight, rust crawling along its edges. Harold lay curled on a thin cot, his frame gaunt and his skin pale, but his eyes flashed with unmistakable relief as Daniel produced a small set of keys. "You came," Harold whispered, voice fragile but fierce with hope. He struggled to sit upright, the weight of captivity etched into every line of his face. Daniel's throat tightened. Years of searching, nights of worry, everything led to this moment. Suddenly, shrill alarms shattered the silence, their wailing cries bouncing off cold walls. Heavy footsteps thundered rapidly toward them, and the faint echo of shouted orders filled the air. Miguel's eyes widened with urgency. "We're running out of time." The team exchanged quick glances, fear, determination, and a shared understanding flashing between them. Escape was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. Daniel's mind raced, calculating their chances, weighing every risk. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We'll have to fight our way out." Gunfire shattered the eerie silence of the compound as Daniel and Miguel unleashed suppressing fire. Their bodies pressed tight against cold concrete walls. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the stale air, mingling with the sharp metallic scent of fear. Martin's hands trembled, but he gripped Harold firmly, careful not to let him falter. Harold's face was pale, sweat trickling down his temple, eyes glazed but filled with a stubborn flicker of hope. Ahead, Jason moved like a shadow, weaving through the maze of dimly lit corridors and locked security doors, his every step measured, his breath steady despite the chaos. The fortress-like compound seemed designed to crush anyone who dared oppose it. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting restless shadows that danced over peeling paint and exposed wiring. Yet, with every echoing footstep and shouted command from the guards behind them, the team's resolve only hardened. Daniel's heart hammered painfully in his chest. Each crack of gunfire was a countdown, a reminder that time was slipping through their fingers. Suddenly, a volley of bullets slammed into the far wall, spraying concrete dust into the air. Miguel cursed under his breath, firing back with fierce determination, his jaw clenched tight. "We're outnumbered, but not outsmarted," he growled, eyes sharp as he darted to cover beside Daniel. Daniel's mind raced, calculating every move, every risk. The compound's blueprint, memorized during their hurried infiltration, guided them like a lifeline. "Jason, left corridor," he barked. Jason slipped through, ducking past a metal door that groaned ominously as it shut behind him. Martin carried Harold close, whispering reassurances, his voice low and steady despite the pounding of his own heart. "Hold on, Dad. We're getting you out." Footsteps thundered behind them, closer now, and a harsh voice barked orders. The guards were relentless, fueled by desperation and the authority of their paymasters. Daniel and Miguel met the next wave head-on, their rifles barking like angry beasts. The clash was brutal, metal clanged against metal, fists collided with flesh, and grunts of effort punctuated the relentless gunfire. Daniel felt a sharp sting across his forearm, blood trickling down, but adrenaline numbed the pain. As they neared the exit, the corridors narrowed, forcing the group into a deadly funnel. Then, like a dark omen stepping into the flickering light, Lucas Greer appeared. His tall frame exuded cold power, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit that somehow seemed out of place amidst the chaos. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, locked onto Daniel with a predatory smile that promised no mercy. "You should have stayed out of this," Greer said, voice dripping with contempt, as if savoring their imminent defeat. Daniel squared his shoulders, planting his feet firmly. His voice was low but resolute. "This ends now, Greer." There was no room for doubt in his words, only the unyielding conviction of a man fighting for justice, for truth, for a friend held captive. Martin, despite the weight of his father in his arms, felt a surge of courage ignite within him. His voice trembled as he whispered, "We're almost there." Suddenly, Jason's hand flashed from beneath his jacket, revealing a compact backup pistol. The weapon gleamed under the harsh lights, a symbol of their last chance. The odds, once grim, now shifted in their favor. The standoff exploded into a fierce firefight, the room erupting with the roar of guns and shouts of defiance. Daniel's senses narrowed to the immediate. The stinging smoke filling his lungs, the deafening blasts ringing in his ears, the desperate beats of his comrades' hearts. They moved as one, covering, advancing, retreating, until the final barrier yielded beneath their assault. Bursting through the exit, the cold forest air hit them like a wave, sharp and sweet after the suffocating tension inside. Trees loomed tall and silent, shadows stretching long in the moonlight as sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel's fingers fumbled to his radio, voice strained but clear. "Backup is en route. Secure the perimeter." Breathless and battered, the team slowed to a halt, the adrenaline ebbing to raw exhaustion. Harold's gaze lifted to meet theirs, a faint, fragile smile breaking through the weariness that clung to his features. "Thank you," he said softly. "If that moment sent chills down your spine, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because uncovering secrets requires courage and determination." The courtroom doors slammed shut behind the last of the accused officials, their faces pale and drawn. The heavy silence in the chamber was shattered only by the soft click of Daniel's pen as he scribbled notes, eyes never leaving the judge's bench. Outside, the air in Ravenwood buzzed with tension and hope. The Sentinel scandal had erupted like a wildfire through the town's veins, leaving no corner untouched, no secret safe. Daniel's jaw clenched as he replayed the testimony from the past few days, the damning evidence, the raw confessions, the whispered threats that had surfaced in hushed conversations. Mayor Lang's resignation was a small victory, but it felt like the beginning, not the end. Daniel looked across at Miguel, whose steady gaze gave him a sliver of reassurance. Miguel's arms were folded tightly, the tension in his shoulders betraying the calm he tried to project. "We're not done yet," Daniel said quietly, voice rough from hours of questioning and sleepless nights. Miguel nodded, eyes scanning the courtroom's entrance as if expecting trouble to walk through those doors at any moment. "There are shadows still lurking," Miguel muttered. "Powerful men who won't go down without a fight." Martin stood near the back of the room, his hands clenched in front of him. The foundation he'd started in his father's name was gaining momentum, but he knew the fight stretched far beyond grant applications and speeches. Every day, he felt the weight of the community's expectations pressing down. As he glanced at his father, Harold, now free yet fragile, Martin's chest tightened. The man who once taught history to hundreds now struggled with his own story, haunted by memories that refused to fade. That evening, the Jenkins home was quieter than usual. The flicker of a single lamp cast long shadows across the living room walls, where faded photographs smiled back at Harold. He sat in his worn armchair, fingers tracing the fabric as if drawing strength from the familiar. The softness of the moment belied the battle raging inside him, each breath a reminder of the days lost, the pain endured. Martin settled beside him, his voice low but steady. "Dad, you're not alone in this. We're all here, every step of the way." Harold's eyes met his son's, reflecting a deep sorrow but also a flicker of something else, resilience. He gave a faint nod, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the murmurs of a town still healing, still wary. Daniel, back at the station, sat staring at his computer screen, the glow illuminating the fatigue etched into his face. New threats had emerged, cryptic messages, unexplained surveillance. Every step forward seemed to draw the watchers closer. Yet retreat was unthinkable. "This is bigger than us," he thought, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Harold deserves justice. The town deserves peace." Miguel was on a call, his tone firm but compassionate, reassuring a whistleblower who had come forward despite fear for his safety. Protecting voices like these was becoming their most urgent mission, and Miguel carried the burden without complaint. In the heart of the town, Martin drafted plans for the Foundation's next campaign, determined to shine a light on transparency and accountability. The past months had transformed him from a grieving son into a beacon for change. Yet, beneath the conviction, a quiet worry lingered. The scars of this ordeal ran deeper than anyone could see. Late that night, Martin returned home to find Harold gazing out the window, the moonlight casting silver across his lined face. The old teacher turned to his son, voice gentle but resolute. "The truth saved me, but it's your strength that saved us all." Daniel's phone buzzed sharply against the wooden desk, shattering the quiet tension that had settled over the precinct. He glanced at the screen, an unfamiliar number from a neighboring town. Swallowing a dry lump in his throat, he answered, voice steady but cautious. "Detective Price." The voice on the other end was hurried, urgent. "Daniel, this is Chief Reynolds from Westfield. We've uncovered something. Another Sentinel compound, much like the one in Ravenwood. It's bigger than we thought." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles whitening. The words struck like a cold wave, pulling the air from his lungs. "What kind of compound?" "Secluded, heavily guarded. We're still piecing it together, but Sentinel's reach extends beyond your town. This is systemic, Daniel. We need to work together." The line went dead before Daniel could reply. He sat back, eyes narrowing as the weight of the call pressed down on him. The corruption wasn't a single, isolated rot. It was a sprawling network, a cancer threatening to consume every corner of their region. Miguel's footsteps echoed softly in the hallway. He appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, brows furrowed. "Everything okay?" Daniel swallowed and relayed the news. Miguel's expression hardened, eyes flickering with resolve and a shadow of weariness. "So, the fight's just beginning." Daniel nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "We'll have to split our focus, keep Ravenwood stable while tackling this new threat. But we're stretched thin." The precinct felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the enormity of their task. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Ravenwood, the town's quiet streets belying the storm brewing beneath. Meanwhile, across town, Martin stood at a podium in the community center's modest auditorium. His voice, firm but passionate, echoed against the brick walls as he addressed a sea of attentive faces, students, parents, local leaders. "My father's story isn't just his own," Martin said, eyes scanning the crowd, voice steady despite the weight of the topic. "It's a call to all of us to stand against injustice, to question power, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves." His hands clenched briefly around the edges of the podium, grounding himself. Each word was a spark, igniting hope and awareness in those who listened. His efforts had begun to ripple beyond Ravenwood, drawing new allies and voices ready to challenge the shadows. Back in his study, Harold sat beneath the dim glow of a desk lamp, pen poised over paper. His gaze was distant, his hand trembling slightly as he chronicled the ordeal, the hidden history of Ravenwood, the lies, the bravery, and the cost. The room was quiet except for the scratch of ink and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Writing was more than catharsis. It was a weapon. With each page, Harold gave voice to the silenced, to those erased by fear and corruption. He paused, eyes moist but determined, knowing that truth held power, power that could shatter walls built on deceit. Yet progress was a double-edged sword. At the precinct, Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time, a series of threatening messages flashed across the screen, each more chilling than the last. Dark warnings wrapped in polite words, hints that their investigation was unwelcome and watched. One evening, as Daniel drove home through Ravenwood's winding roads, headlights followed him closely. His heart hammered, every nerve sharp. The car tailed him persistently, mirrors reflecting his cautious eyes. He took deliberate turns, trying to lose the shadow that clung to him like a ghost. Arriving at his small, cluttered house, Daniel parked quickly and locked the doors behind him. The street was empty except for the whisper of the wind through the trees. He leaned against the door, exhaling slowly, though his mind raced. Miguel met him outside moments later, eyes dark with concern. "They're sending a message. They want us to back off." Daniel's jaw clenched. Backing down isn't an option. Not now. That night, alone by the window, Daniel stared out into the darkness where his yard met the woods. The cold air seeped in through the cracked pane, brushing against his skin like a warning. His thoughts swirled. How much further would they go to protect their secrets? How many lives hung in the balance? He whispered into the stillness, recalling the voice that had haunted his investigation since the start. The voice of a man who had been lost but never silenced. They can't hide the truth forever. Daniel's fingers trembled as he stared down at the crumpled file on his desk. The paper's inside detailed how sensitive information had been leaking out. Blueprints of the police department's new strategies, names of protected witnesses, even plans to dismantle Sentinel's hold on the town. Whoever was feeding this information to Sentinel sympathizers was buried deep within the very force meant to safeguard Ravenwood. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the weight of betrayal sinking like ice in his chest. He had trusted these men. How could one of them be turning against them? He glanced across the room at Miguel, whose face was set in a grim mask. Miguel's eyes, normally steady and reassuring, now flickered with worry. "This changes everything," Daniel muttered, voice low. "We're fighting shadows on both sides." Miguel nodded, leaning forward. "We need to handle this quietly. If the mole gets wind that we're onto him, he'll vanish or worse." His voice was sharp, urgent, like a warning shot.
No hasty moves.
Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the pressure coil tighter around him. Tracking a traitor within the force meant balancing justice with discretion. One wrong step and their entire operation could collapse. As they planned their next move, the cold winter wind rattled the window panes of the station, mirroring the chill settling in Daniel's bones. That evening, as snowflakes drifted silently over Ravenwood, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment. The flickering glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows on the peeling walls. He thought of Harold, frail but unbroken, fighting his own battle against darkness. Daniel's resolve hardened. He couldn't let betrayal win. Across town, Harold lay awake, the sharp ache in his chest soothed by the steady rhythm of his breath. Despite warnings from friends to stay silent, he was determined to testify publicly. The corruption he'd uncovered wasn't just about land deals or dirty money. It was a wound tearing apart his community. "If I don't speak up," Harold whispered to himself, "then who will?" The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with an electricity that was both hopeful and tense. Reporters jostled for position, citizens whispered anxiously, and uniformed officers kept watch. Daniel and Miguel arrived early, their eyes scanning the crowd, searching for signs of trouble. As Harold took the stand, his voice wavered slightly, but his gaze was unwavering. "I've lived in Ravenwood all my life," he began, "and I believed in this town. But I learned that beneath its surface, there were shadows that threatened the very soul of our home." His words rippled through the courtroom like a storm. Daniel watched from the back, chest tight. He knew that by speaking out, Harold was painting a target on his back, not just from Sentinel, but from those who wished to keep the truth buried. The courtroom felt like a battlefield where every glance and whisper carried weight. As the trial unfolded over weeks, alliances shifted like sand. Former allies grew silent. Old friends turned wary. Secrets once hidden in the dark crept into the light, and the stakes grew deeply personal. Daniel caught himself wondering who among his colleagues could be trusted. Every smile now shadowed with doubt. The courtroom was thick with tension, every breath and whisper hanging heavy in the air like a storm about to break. Rows of spectators sat rigid, eyes darting between the judge, the jury, and the weary but resolute faces on the witness stand. The faint hum of reporters' cameras and murmured conversations formed an uneasy soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Daniel sat at the prosecutor's table, fingers clenched tightly around his pen, his gaze fixed on the witnesses as they recounted the years of corruption that had poisoned Ravenwood's heart. One by one, the witnesses stepped forward, their voices trembling with a mix of fear and determination. They told of secret meetings behind closed doors, money exchanged under the table, and threats whispered in dark corners. The names of the Sentinel Group and Mayor Lang were uttered with grave weight, revealing a web of bribery and intimidation that had been woven over decades. Daniel watched as Harold, sitting beside his son Martin, held his head high despite the exhaustion that tugged at the edges of his pale face. The courtroom's atmosphere felt electric, every word pushing the walls closer to collapse. Sentinel's defense team worked desperately to undermine the testimonies. Their lawyers raised sharp objections, questioning the credibility of witnesses, accusing the prosecution of bias, and trying to sow seeds of doubt among the jurors. But the evidence was relentless: documents, photographs, recorded conversations, each piece fitting together like a grim puzzle. Miguel stood silently beside Daniel, alert to every movement, ready to protect those who dared speak the truth. The gravity of their task pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. Outside, the courthouse was no less chaotic. Protesters gathered, their chants echoing against the stone walls, demanding justice or, from some quarters, claiming innocence. Reporters swarmed, broadcasting live feeds that sent ripples of the case into homes across the region. Daniel's phone buzzed repeatedly with updates from his team coordinating witness protection. Threats had escalated, not just to the witnesses, but to jurors and courthouse staff. The line between law and danger blurred with every passing hour. Late one night, as the courtroom emptied and silence settled, an urgent alarm shattered the quiet. Daniel's heart thudded painfully in his chest as he raced toward the evidence storage facility. Flames licked hungrily at the walls, smoke curling thick and black into the night sky. Firefighters battled the blaze, but Daniel's mind raced. How many crucial files were lost? How many lives were affected by this desperate act to erase the truth? Martin stood nearby, eyes wide with disbelief and pain. "They're trying to bury everything," he whispered, voice cracking. "But they don't know how much we've saved." The community's response was swift and powerful. Volunteers brought copies of documents, digital backups were uploaded and shared widely, and a collective refusal to let the fire extinguish their fight ignited hope anew. Days later, the courtroom buzzed again, the tension now tinged with cautious optimism. The jury's return was met with a hush that fell over the room like a held breath. One by one, the guilty verdicts were read aloud, against the mayor, high-ranking officials, and Sentinel's leaders. The courtroom erupted with a mix of relief, anger, and tears. Daniel felt the weight of years lifting, but the victory was far from sweet. He glanced at Harold, whose eyes shimmered with tears of both sorrow and triumph. As the courtroom settled, Harold rose, his voice barely steady but resolute as he addressed the room. "This fight isn't over, but tonight, truth has won." The morning sun filtered softly through the half-open blinds of Daniel's modest office, casting long, thin shadows across the scattered case files that still bore the scent of freshly printed paper. Outside, Ravenwood stirred slowly, its streets quieter than they had been in months, a town exhausted but breathing again. Daniel sat behind his desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed on the framed photograph of Harold Jenkins shaking hands with Miguel at the courthouse steps. The image captured a moment of victory, but Daniel's gaze lingered on the weary lines etched into Harold's face, a silent reminder of the price they had all paid. Across town, Miguel leaned against the worn brick wall of a neighborhood cafe, watching children play in a nearby park. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, but beneath the peaceful scene, Miguel felt the restless pulse of a town still healing. His jaw clenched slightly as he replayed the countless hours spent chasing shadows and broken truths. "We've done a lot, but the fight isn't over," he muttered quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of resolve and tiredness. In the quiet comfort of his garden, Harold Jenkins knelt among the rows of chrysanthemums and late-blooming roses, fingers brushing over the rich soil. His hands, once steady with the confidence of a seasoned teacher, now trembled faintly, echoes of trauma that lingered just beneath the surface. Yet his eyes held a spark of peace, mingled with the wisdom of a man who had faced darkness and refused to be broken. "Sometimes," he whispered to himself, "the hardest battles bring the deepest growth." The words felt like a prayer and a promise. The morning sun poured through the towering oaks that circled Ravenwood Park, casting long golden beams across the freshly laid bricks of the new Memorial Plaza. A gentle breeze stirred the autumn leaves, sending a crisp rustle through the air, mingling with distant birdsong and the soft murmur of the town slowly waking. At the heart of the plaza stood the memorial, a tall, polished granite slab etched with Harold Jenkins's name and a simple inscription, "Truth and justice endure." Harold himself stood quietly before it, his silver hair catching the light, eyes narrowed against the sun but shining with something far deeper, relief, determination, and a quiet pride. His thin frame was steady, but his hands, folded loosely in front of him, trembled slightly, betraying the weight of years spent in turmoil. Around him, the small crowd of townsfolk waited respectfully, their faces a mix of reverence and lingering pain. Daniel Price was near the front, his broad shoulders squared, eyes scanning the crowd with a protective vigilance that had never left him since Harold's disappearance. Beside him, Miguel Alvarez shifted uneasily, the tension in his jaw visible even beneath his calm exterior. Both men had fought battles they never expected, their loyalty to Harold now etched permanently into their souls. Martin Jenkins approached, his steps purposeful yet measured. The years had sculpted him into a man shaped by loss and resolve. As he reached Harold's side, his eyes softened, and he placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion, "this is what you fought for. This is what we all fought for." Harold turned, a faint smile breaking the lines of weariness. "It's more than I ever hoped for," he admitted, voice low but steady. "To see the truth shine here, where everyone can see it, it means the shadows finally recede." The crowd began to stir, the mayor stepping forward to address the gathering. But the words felt almost secondary to the weight of the moment. This memorial was not just stone and engraving. It was the hard-won symbol of a town's awakening from decades of silence and fear. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Harold lingered. His eyes scanned the familiar streets, the oak-lined avenues that held both painful memories and fresh hope. Teaching again had become his lifeline, mentoring young activists, encouraging them to question, to stand firm, to speak out against injustice. Each student carried a spark that reminded Harold of the importance of vigilance. Daniel approached, nodding respectfully. "The force is changing, Harold. We're rebuilding trust, slowly, but surely." Miguel joined them, adding, "It's a new chapter, but the work's far from over." Harold's gaze turned inward, the flicker of old shadows still haunting his thoughts. He understood well that darkness could creep back if vigilance faltered. Yet, as he looked at the men beside him, he felt a renewed strength. Martin appeared again, holding a folder thick with proposals for his foundation's next initiatives. "We're ready to keep pushing," he said firmly. "For transparency, for accountability, for every voice that's been silenced." Harold nodded, the words resonating deeply. The fight for truth never ends, but it's a fight worth every step. As the afternoon light softened and the park emptied, Harold stood one last time before the memorial plaque, the cool stone beneath his fingertips grounding him in the present. He whispered, "I was lost," his voice carrying the full weight of his journey. "But together, we found our way." The mystery remains, but the search continues. If you stand for answers, justice, and hope, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to explore themes of mystery and disappearance. Its purpose is to engage viewers and inspire reflection on unresolved questions and the search for truth.